Howdy YouTube, Unky Joe here, Unky Joe's Playhouse as promised. Part 2 of the Microsoft Exchange 2016 server installation and configuration. Today we're going to do some of the more intricate setup steps for Exchange that you will need to follow in order to get mail flowing, incoming in and outgoing. And then we'll show you our results at the end of the video by actually testing it and making sure the mail is flowing. One thing I do want to communicate with people is pay very close attention when I start covering the DNS information, because that is the key to making all of this work. So pay very close attention when DNS comes up, and of course if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments section or send me an email to unkyjoesplayhouse@gmail.com, and I'll help you as best I can get through this. Now look, this setup is by no means the end-all be-all setup of how you set up an Exchange server. This is how I got it to work for me. So there's going to be, I'm sure, people that disagree with my setup or who have set it up before and say, no, you do it this way. This is the way I got it to work, and it's working well. So that speaks for itself. Now, some of you have asked why I used Microsoft Server 2012. Just because I have a license for it and I wanted to make use of that license, and really I don't think the underlying operating system really matters very much with Exchange 2016. The instructions I followed and the tutorials I went through were all installed on Server 2012 R2. So if you want to install it on Server 2016, that's fine as well, but I'm at the limit for my license usage on Server 2016, so I just wanted to put it on a 2012 server. Well, enough rambling about. Let's get started with the video right now. So now that we have Exchange up and running, the first thing you're going to need to do to make all this other magic happen is get into the Exchange Administrator panel. Now, in theory, you can do this with Google Chrome, but I'm going to do it with Internet Explorer 11 just so I don't have any issues. And what you want to do is you want to go to a secure website, so it's https:// and then I'm going to go in through the IP address of my mail server, which is 5.10, and then I'm going to use /E as in Edward, C as in cat, P as in Paul. And what that does is it brings you up to this the site is not secure window. Just click on more information and go on to the web page, and you'll see that brings you into the Exchange Admin Center, and this is where we will be doing the majority of the rest of our work. I'm going to go ahead and enter my password here. Now, I am just going to say this, Exchange 2016 is a pig, and by pig I mean I have set aside 4 processors for it and 8 gig of RAM, and ideally I should have between 10 to 16 gig of RAM in an organization, but the minimum requirements are 8 gigs, so that's what I'm giving Exchange right now to use. So I'm going to go ahead and take this in the order that I like to set things up. And so the first thing I like to do is go to the mail flow, and then I need to go to a send connector, because the first thing we need to be able to do is set this thing up to be able to send mail. So I'm going to click on the little plus sign here, and that'll bring up another one, and this is going to be, I'm going to choose internet, for example, to send internet mail. It kind of tells you right here on the screen what you need to do. And then on the name, I'm going to be SMTP send connector, and next. And this is going to use a MX record associated with the recipient domain. Next. And now we need to set up the address space. So we're going to click on the little plus sign here, and this is going to be an SMTP, and we're going to enter an asterisk here, which means it will be the send connector for all the domains on this 2016 Exchange server. I'm going to save that, click on next. So on the send connector, we need to associate a server. Click on plus, choose your Exchange server, tell it OK, and then click on finish. So there's our send connector. You can come over here, it tells you when it was modified. connector status, logging, whether it's off or on, the maximum send message size, etc. And then if you need to, you can come back up here and you can edit the parameters of it. As you can see, it's enabled, no protocol logging level. I've just accepted the defaults here. Delivery is an MX record. Scoping, it's going to be for all domains. That's why the little asterisk is there. And this is the source server that it will respond, that will handle those. And then we can come back in here and put a FQDN for the response for hello or eHello. I don't use those, so at this point now we can just cancel here. And now we've created our send connector. Alright, so by default, Exchange is going to create a accepted domain for you based upon the Active Directory domain you installed in. And in my case, this is mcs.local. But my actual mail domain is MCTXNet. So I had to create an accepted domain for MCTXNet. So basically, I'm going to show you the settings on this. I'm going to go to Edit, and you just give it a common name. This is just a display name. Then your actual fully qualified domain name goes in here, the MCTXNet. And then you want to make sure the accepted domain is authoritative. That means email is delivered only to valid recipients in this Exchange organization. All email for unknown recipients is rejected. And then what you want to do is make that your default domain. And it tells you over to the right. The default accepted domain is used in the external postmaster address and an encapsulated non-SMTP email address. You can delete the default accepted domain only after you make another accepted domain the default. So we're going to make that the default, save on that, and you'll see now that it is the authoritative and the default domain. So if I had other domains, I could add them here, and I do, but I'm not going to add them at this point. I just want to get through this initial configuration, and any advanced configuration will come and do it another part. So that's how you set up your default domain. So if yours was joeblow.net or kingdomcome.com or whatever it was, that's what you would fill in that area there. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is create an email address policy. And I've already done that. As you can see over here, blah blah blah, all the stuff is down here. I'm going to go ahead and edit this and show you what entries I made. So this is the default policy. It has the lowest policy in there that was set that automatically. And the email address policy is alias@mcstx.net. So if we're to edit that, you can tell it what domain. We're using a custom domain, mcstx.net, or we could have just clicked up here, and then we're going to use alias@contoso.com. So it'll be alias@mcstx.net, and make this format the reply email address. So I'm going to save that. You can see now that it is in uppercase letters. The lowercase one here is not going to be used. This one is, and this is going to apply to all recipient types. Click on Save. Okay, after you save the status of the default, our details pane shows not applied. Click Apply. So we're going to tell it OK, and Apply, and Yes, and it'll apply the default policy. Alright, so now the fun part, DNS settings. Now, this is not a DNS tutorial, this is just showing you how I set it up. Now, my domain registrar is hover.com. I use them because they're cheap and they have a very simple interface, very easy to use. The only complaint I have about Hover is they have no way to export these settings. So if you wanted to wipe these out and start over from scratch, I recommend you take some screenshots and save them somewhere. But basically, I have an A record with an @ sign in here. That's my public-facing IP address given to me by my ISP, my internet service provider. Then I've created an MX record. A type is MX, and it's @. And then the value is, this is the priority 10, and the name is mail.mcstx.net. Then I created a CNAME or an alias for the auto-discover, and that points to mail.mcstx.net. Then I have another A record for my mail server. This one will change. For example, this is the IP I use for my mail server, because I only host email on my public IP. I don't host my website on my public IP. So this IP address will be changing later to the IP address of my web hosting provider, if that makes sense. That's why we have another A record or host record here for the mail server, so it knows it's at a different IP than the default host record, which is what those @ signs are. I hope that makes sense to you. And then I create a couple more CNAME records or aliases, one for Outlook Web Access to point to mail.mcstx.net. And what I could do is create another CNAME in here called ECP. That way I could just type ecp.mcstx.net and it would take me to that administration panel. But this is the basic settings you're going to need for your email. Now, if you're using dynamic DNS, you're going to need to set that up differently. I don't use dynamic DNS. There are a ton of tutorials out there on the internet about setting up dynamic DNS. So I would defer to one of those setup videos. So, you know, my channel is kind of a learn as you go kind of thing. I don't profess to know everything, but I can learn and I'm quick on my feet. Anyway, so this is my first time setting up Exchange 2016, and you may have seen in some of the previous cuts, I have a page I'm referring to for instructions. But as is the case with any other product you set up from scratch and have never touched before, there are always little things that everybody doesn't cover. And so even though I'm following a tutorial and going through step by step, I ran into some problems. Namely, I went out and changed my DNS settings, as you saw. Got them all right, and I could send mail, but I couldn't receive mail. So these are the additional steps I needed to take in order to be able to send mail out through my server. And then I ran into some other problems as well, which we'll come to as we get things up and running, as I start showing you how to get things up and running. So let's look real quick at what I had to do on that Exchange server. The big thing I had to do, and I'll show you, I'm just going to go ahead and connect to this virtual machine through this Hyper-V console, just to show you. One of the things I had to do out at the C drive is go into the C Windows, let's see here, System 32, drivers, etc directory. And in there is a host file, okay? Now, you need to make sure you edit this file as an administrator. So you have to open it with Notepad, but you have to open Notepad as an administrator. So I would do that first and then come to this directory. I'm just going to show you what I ended up doing. So you need to put a couple of host entries in your host file. This was recommended by Microsoft. I found this in an article browsing the net. So there's my IP address of this server, and then there's my internal domain name, or my internal name for this machine name, and then my machine name plus mcs.local. I had to do that, save it, and then reboot the server in order for everything to work together. And that's how I overcame my problem with receiving mail. And I'm going to show you what I used to test that with. So I came over here to wormly.com test SMTP server, and I'm going to enter my, I'm going to use a different mail server, mail.mcstx.net. That's my company domain. And let's just do help desk at mcstx.net. And then the sender email is going to be test@tools.wormly.com. So the problem I was getting is anytime I would run this test, it would fail on the receive connector. And so the fix to that situation was to go out and edit that host file as I just showed you. So this will give you a lot of information. It gives you an idea of the name of the mail server and what version of Exchange it's running. But the big one you're looking for is down here that it was successful. Message completed successfully. Now, before I made those 2 host entry changes, it gave me an error code. And then I was able to take the information from that error code, look that up on the net, and find a solution. And amazingly, it was on a Microsoft forum, and it was what Microsoft recommended as a workaround of the problem. But I think some of the other changes I made may have fixed this as well, and you'll see what I'm talking about when we get to those changes. Now, one of the other problems I ran into, and this is a very laid-back video tonight because I'm just very laid back. I'm tired. It's Friday night. I've been working all day. I'm a little tired. The other problem I ran into, I used to, in order to use Office 360, let me start at the beginning. Part of my partner agreement is I get a 5-user version of Office 365, which means I can run an Exchange server in the cloud if I wanted to. So that's what I did. I signed up for that, had it up and running, had my domain hosted there, and then I copied everything. I went into my Outlook and I backed everything up to a PST file for both my main user account and for my help desk account, saved them to a PST. Got the new server up and running, everything was working fine, went through Outlook Web Access, which you will see here in a minute, and then I said, okay, well now I need to set up Outlook. So I'm running Outlook 2016 as part of Office 2016, not Office 365. The problem is that I had the connector for the online Office 365. So every time Outlook would come up, even though it let me create a new profile, it would keep popping up that screen where it wants you to log into Microsoft services. And I couldn't get it to go away no matter what I did. I mean, I tried 20 different suggestions from articles I found out there on the web. Then I had the forethought to say, well, since I backed everything up, and since I don't need that Exchange Online account, I would go out and log into that account, delete the domain out there, delete the users, and you know, terminate the account. I did that, and then in addition to that, I came in and I uninstalled Office 2016. It took about 5 minutes. It's a very fast machine. And then I reinstalled it. That took about, I rebooted after I uninstalled it. Then I reinstalled it and made sure that, yeah, it took about 10 minutes, like I said. But then I reinstalled Office 2016 and then I rebooted again. Now, that in itself fixed that problem with that login, that Microsoft login. It didn't prompt me for that anymore. I don't know which one fixed it. The fact that I'm not using the online Office 365 or whether what I did made that change, reinstalling Office. I think it was probably reinstalling Office that took care of that problem for me. Isn't learning fun? Because the other thing I learned is that Outlook 2016 must have an auto-discover location in order to set itself up. In in Exchange 2013 and below, in Outlook 2013 and below, you had an option to connect to an Exchange server. This time you don't. You only have an option to connect to Office 365 or a couple other different connections, but an Exchange Active Sync. But Exchange itself is not in there anymore. It depends on the auto-discover address to go out to your Exchange server and to find the auto-discover information so it can configure itself for your mail server. And that's great. That's a wonderful thing. I mean, you know what a time saver that is? All I got to do is just log onto the user, start Outlook, and it sets it up automatically. Unless it can't find your auto-discover address. And this is where things get complicated because I'm NATing through a firewall. So I've opened a couple of ports on a firewall to allow traffic in and out. But in addition to that, I'm also using that domain locally. In fact, I'm using mcs.local as my internal domain name. So when you run Outlook and it goes out and finds that, to find that auto-discover, it goes out to the internet. It doesn't know to go back to my server here internally and get the auto discover and setup information. So it works okay outside of the network because it knows what my internet address is, but it doesn't work internally. So the way you overcome that is with something called split DNS. So what you notice when I put my DNS entries in my TCP/IP connections, I always list my Active Directory DNS server first, and then Google as a secondary server. And the reason I do that is because I want my machines to all go out to my local DNS server first before they go out to the internet. And that's where split DNS comes in handy, because I can create a sudo MCTXNet domain within my internal MCS.local domain via the DNS. So I'm going to show you how I did that right now. And I ran across a great article that taught me how to do that. I always knew how to do it in theory, but I'd never applied it. So all I did was, as you see, here's MCS.local, and here's the name of all my machines and their IP addresses. So what I had to do was create a domain called MCSTX.net, which just means that if I try to go out to MCSTX.net and do a DNS query, it's going to query these records first. And then if it doesn't find what else it's looking for, it's going to query the DNS records out on the internet. So all I did was I created a what is called a CNAME, an alias, and I put in the name mail, and the fully qualified domain name was mail.mcstx.net because it gets it from this right here, and then I browsed and pointed it to my internal email server, mcs_exchange16.mcs.local. So in effect, what I've told it is that mail.mcstx.net is actually this server here internally. So that gives you an idea of how split DNS works. And you can imagine that can come in very handy. For example, if you're doing some development testing and you wanted your www domain to point to an internal server instead of one out on the net, you could set up internal. This is how powerful DNS is. So if DNS gets hacked, I mean, it is the core of the internet. Without DNS, it doesn't work. So you can imagine if your DNS gets hacked, all kinds of wonderful little games you can play on people. I mean, you could have google.com go to a porn site on your local network and really get somebody in trouble if you do what you're doing. I would never do that. No, honestly, I wouldn't. But it's just it's an example of how powerful DNS is. It translates IP addresses into names, which are much easier to deal with than numbers. People memorize names or phrases a little bit better than they do IP addresses. So that's why it's there, and we're using it to our advantage. So now when Outlook comes up, it knows if it goes to mail.mcstx.net, it knows to go to that internal server for its auto discover information. And then if I were setting up Outlook on a computer outside my local network on the internet, it would know to go to the auto discover at my DNS provider, which would in turn point internally to my server here. But it's just a way to get around that limitation when you have an internal domain with a different name than your external domain. Then the next thing I needed to do in order to complete this puzzle was to come into my Exchange admin panel, or admin center, log in, and then come over to, let's see, where is it? Public folders, servers. Yeah, come over to servers, and then up here to virtual directories. Now these are your, I don't want to get too complicated and go down the rabbit hole. This is basically the location of all your websites. Like this website right here is called the ECP website, okay? And normally what happens is if I were to right click on one of the, or if I were to edit one of these, normally this is the URL that's in there. and that is your local mcs.local. You see how it's mcs.local? Pay no attention to this down here. But this is my mcs.local domain. And that was the only URL that was filled in. Now, I could have gone down each one of these websites and manually entered that external URL, but there's an easier way to do it. So I'm going to cancel on there. So these are all the websites that are supposed to be accessible. Like, for example, Outlook Web Access and OAB and ActiveSync and MAPI and EWS and ECP, and then the all-important Autodiscover, which is, if you notice in here, doesn't have a website to go to because it is a website. That's the default website, and it's in bolds. Well, I mean, it is the default website. What I did instead was, if you simply come up here to this wrench icon, you can configure your external access domain. So what you would do is click on the plus here, choose your server, and then enter the domain name you will use with your external servers. For example, mail.contoso.com. In my case, I entered mail.mcstx.net because that's my domain. So once I did that, it went out here and it changed all of these to have the proper external URL. So what that did in effect was tell Exchange, okay, these are the external addresses. And what that did is it told Autodiscover where all those locations were. So that when Autodiscover, think of Autodiscover like a DHCP request. It's very similar. You know, a DHCP request, it sends out a MAC address and requests an address, and it gets a lease, yada yada. Same way with Autodiscover. Autodiscover, your mail client or whatever that's set to use it, goes out, looks at the Autodiscover record, and then the Autodiscover record tells it where to look on the web, what IP address or DNS name or wherever to look. And then it reports it back to the application, and then it populates that information, if you've got the correct password, automatically. And so in essence what that did was it created a connection to my Exchange server via Outlook 2016. And I'm not going to show you that, but it's, you know, just basically go through the Outlook setup. It'll if you're on a domain, it'll automatically detect what user you're logged in as. It'll create an account, it'll create the PST file, etc., the OST file, and you're set up, bing bang boom, and ready to go. That's why it's very important to follow those steps that I just showed you. Make sure you do that, or it's not going to work, and you're going to be banging your head against the wall trying to figure out what's wrong, because this is from over probably 10 or 15 different articles. Now, I've bookmarked all those articles in my web browser, but I'm probably not going to put them down in the notes because you guys need to do a little bit of work, and I've pretty much told you what you need to do. So those articles, if you watch this video, they don't matter. If you follow my video and pause it at the right places and do what I've told you to do, you should be good. So now the next thing I want to do is I'm going to go create a new mail user and show you the process of doing that. And you can do all that now through the Exchange Admin Center. It used to be on Exchange 2010, 2013. It was a little more convoluted to do this process, but I'm just going to log in as the administrator. And that's one detail I left out. You may want to make sure that you always log in as the domain administrator, enterprise administrator, so that you have the proper rights. So the first thing it brings me up to is my recipients page, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a new user mailbox, and I'm going to call this let's just call it Unky Joe's Playhouse. This is not going to be an existing user, it's going to be a new user. Now, you remember when we set up Active Directory in the first video, we tied Active Directory with Exchange, so that now we have the ability not only to create an Exchange user, but also an Active Directory user at the same time. So I'll just enter Unky Joe. I'm just going to enter some initials and just enter Playhouse. This really doesn't matter what you put in here. This will be the name of the account and the display name. And then this is the all-important one, so I'm just going to do Unky Joe's Playhouse as the login name. And that's going to be at mcs.local. Okay, and I'm going to give it a password. And I'm not going to require a password change at the next logon. And then I'm going to click on Save. Okay, so you notice now it has created this new user right here. It's a user. It's also created the email address unkyjoesplayhouse@mcstx.net. So now what we want to do is see if that actually works and we can send and receive email on that account. So let's try that next. Now, one thing I didn't show you about split DNS is, and one thing I didn't discuss, so I want to make sure I explain this clearly. I've got split DNS set up and I created that mcstx.net internal domain name. So I do that mainly for my internal clients so that they know how to get to things, okay? But it's an all or nothing deal with split DNS because I've made that server the authoritative domain name server, that anytime I want to go out to mcstx.net, I have to have entries in that DNS server that tell me how to get to those places. And I don't like having to type in the IP address and all that crap and for Outlook Web Access, because that's what we're going to use to test the email. So one additional thing you may need to do on your split DNS, let's come into DNS and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So there's that mcstx.net. So anytime you type anything in an internet browser or whatever, it's going to go to this name server for its resolution. And you notice now I have an OWA in there. So what I could do is type in owa.mcstx.net and it should take me to the Outlook Web Access interface. I only have to do this internally. Well, I've also set this OWA on my hover.com DNS settings so that if I'm outside of my mcstx.local domain, it'll know how to get to the internal one. Now, the problem's going to come in later when I go to create my web hosting. I'm going to need to make sure that I create proper A records and CNAME records that'll point to that new IP that I'm going to be getting from my web hosting provider. So what I did here, and let me bring up the screen and show you, is I simply created a CNAME alias called OWA that points to my internal server, so that when I go out and use a web browser, I can get to Outlook Web Access internally. So now what I need to do is come up here and type in https://owa.mcstx.net, and that should take me to my Outlook Web Access. Now I need to change my login name here, so it needs to be domain/username. So UNKY Joe's Playhouse, and then my chosen password. And then click on sign in. And the first time I sign in, it's going to take a minute. We need to tell it what time zone we're in. So we do Central Time. And now my Outlook Web Access is up and running. Now we'll do a separate video on how to configure OWA Outlook Web Access, because frankly most people will be using this to connect up to Exchange. You can use Outlook 2016 if you want to, but most people prefer the web interface. So I'm just going to create a new email here, and I'm going to send it to unkyjoesplayhouse@gmail.com, and this is going to be a test. And then we'll click on send, and it should temporarily be in the drafts folder, and then it'll disappear and it'll end up being in the sent items folder. So now if I go to my Gmail account, I should see that email in here right there. And yes, it is. Okay, so Unky Joe's Playhouse at MCTXNet. If I click on reply, tell myself I got it. And then we come back to Unky Joe's Playhouse. You'll notice right here, we got the email. So there you go. The email is up and running. It has been tested and it is working. And don't forget, we got part 3 coming up here real soon where we start getting into configuring the mail clients like Outlook Web Access and Outlook 2016. We're going to walk through how to do that. And then we're going to go in and we're going to start tweaking our mail server and showing you what some of the other settings do and how they affect the mail server. So don't forget to be looking for that video as well. So there you go. We've got it set up. We got mail flowing, etc., etc., etc. So that's gonna do it for this portion of the video. And as promised, I want to be able to edit this and get it up today. But you know, Exchange 2016 is an advanced topic. It's an advanced piece of software, and it's a good piece of software. But you've got to have some prerequisite learning before you can figure out how to set it up. Even with my vast experience and all the years in IT, I still have to be shown how to do it, and you have to dig and be able to do research and so forth and so on. Now there are alternatives out there to Exchange as a mail server. There's free Linux servers, etc. In fact, Cario makes a excellent, or used to make an excellent Exchange-like email server. But you know, Microsoft just seems to do Exchange very well. And it's not an expensive product. You know, when you think most hosted Exchange servers on the cloud are $6 per user per month, and you've got 30 users, that's $180 a month, or a little over $2,000 a year for email. When you can buy a 5-user version of Exchange for $500 or $600, and then the user licenses are, you know, $20 or $30 a piece, and you have them in perpetuity. I mean, I still have clients I know that are running Exchange 2003, so it's going to be around a long time. So if you really want a really solid mail server, and you don't want to host your stuff in the cloud, this is the way to go, just in my opinion. So we hope you found the video entertaining and informative as always. Give us a thumbs up down below, smash that like button if you liked it. Please subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. We'd like to see you again. Don't forget to hit the little bell so you're notified when we have new videos or live streams. And if you are so inclined to donate to the cause, we take PayPal and Patreon. In fact, we have stopped taking donations for the hard drives. Got all the hard drives we need now. But we are going to be putting a mini split heat pump and air conditioner in my office to help alleviate some of that noise for that window air conditioner. And it got a little chilly in here this winter, so I want to make sure I have a heat pump in here instead of this space heater to keep this room warm and cut down on the noise. The cost is about $600. So if you want to contribute to the cause, that's where the money that you're sending me is going to go to. We're going to help defray the cost of that heat pump unit we're going to put in here. So donations are greatly appreciated, but don't feel compelled. And if you can only give 50 cents, a quarter, a dollar, whatever, anything is helpful. So thanks again for watching, and don't forget, we'll see you on the other side.